Hello everyone, thanks for tuning in today. For this video we're going to be going over the girl Wraith. She is one of the two new girls just released, along with Phoenix of course. So let's get into the differences between them and how Wraith is going to be used in the meta moving forward. Alright, so the first thing we see is that she has 483,000 health, or 484 if you count all those nines. Like, that's pretty close. But anyway, right as the first thing you can tell is that she is a lot tankier than Phoenix is. Phoenix is a little bit frail, and that is really her only weakness, that she can be bopped a bit, especially if something like Psychic manages to get her weakness ability on her. Of course, as someone mentioned in the comments in my previous video, because of Phoenix's immunity to stun, she can't be stunned by Psychic's passive. But the weakness effect that Psychic has is still very useful against Phoenix. That's not quite as true for Wraith. Now don't get me wrong, it's still very powerful, but at least Wraith has a bit of a health pool that you have to chew through. She shouldn't be one-shot by most girls, except for probably Phoenix. That's an unfortunate byproduct of how strong Phoenix is, but under normal circumstances, Wraith can usually take a hit. The second thing is she has 27,000 attack, 1,500 armor, and 1,200 speed. These stats are very similar to Phoenix's, with nothing being specifically outstanding except for the speed. The speed is amazing, making her the second fastest girl in the game, or fastest tied, depending on how you want to look at that, and that speed is excellent. Although, unfortunately, it's a little bit misaligned with her kit, and as we'll see a little bit later as I go over her abilities, I'll explain why that is. It's not a bad thing by any means, don't get me wrong, but I personally would have liked to see them take maybe some of that speed out and just give her raw attack or something of that nature. And let's get into her abilities. Her first ability is the 6 Mind, deals 300 damage to, or 300% attack as damage against 2 random enemies. It deals an additional 180 if the enemy is a priest, and if the enemy's HP is higher, it deals 20% of their total health. Extra damage can equal no more than 1,500% of her attack. That is just an absurd number, and she gains 22.5 crit for 3 rounds, and it's a must hit. And this is the first thing that I can see that makes her different from Phoenix, is that clearly she can do a ton of burst damage, especially against priests. If your opponent happens to be running something like Kong Ming and Psychic and Nani on the same team, trying to power up a core, then Wraith can do very good work at shutting down some of their more important units. And that 480% attack damage is insane. Now, the 20% enemy's total health damage, though, is what makes her incredibly good against bosses and PvE in general. Of course, that doesn't count for the tower so much, but that is incredibly impactful against guild bosses as well as the friendship bosses, because their health is so high. You're almost always going to be proccing this, and it's always going to do a ton of damage. 1,500% attack is just a ludicrous number. I mean, you just look at that and compare that to the other numbers that girls get, and you can see how much of an outlier that is. On top of that, the 22% free crit, that's just free damage, so nothing to complain about there, but at least we see from her ability that she has a clear role to fill as a strong PvE DPS against bosses. But do not let that undermine the fact that she can do 480% damage against priests, which means even if you don't have her in your main PvP lineup, which I assume most people would anyway, but if you do happen to come up with a team comp that doesn't serve as well with Wraith as it does with somebody else, you can still mix her in depending on who your opponent is if they use the right amount of priests, because of how much burst potential this has. Her first passive is that whenever an ally releases their active skill, she gains 30 energy and heals herself for 100% of her attack. And this is pretty big, especially for the other side of PvE that is important, which is patrol and hiking. Hiking not as much as patrol, I feel, of course, but that's just my personal opinion, but having a heal on a strong PvE girl is great for patrol, because it allows her to kill these enemies and heal as she moves through, so she isn't taking that chip damage every round and can actually keep pushing you through the higher and higher stages. And patrol is incredibly important. I don't know how the community feels about it because it's not something that generally gets talked about, which makes me feel like it's underestimated, but the resources you can gain from patrol is nothing to be scoffed at. The upcoming video I'm going to be doing about resource management is going to go into that quite a bit and how important patrol can be for maintaining the ability to complete events as they pass through, especially for players who are dolphins instead of whales, or free-to-play players, of course. But so having a girl that allows you to do patrol well is amazing. Now Wraith is, since she's so hard to make, it kind of makes it weird because she is good at it, but I don't think she's the best at it. So if you're the kind of person who can afford to 10-star Wraith, this probably isn't that important, so it's a little bit awkward in that way. But if you're just starting out and you manage to get, say, a 5 or 6-star Wraith, and she can help you carry you through the early portions of patrol, which is great for starting off and building up resources. The second passive she has is increases her health by 30, speed by 60, and armor break by 40%, and gives her silence immune. And this is another thing that makes her useful somewhat in PvP for conditional fights. If you're against someone who has Amazon, or again Kong Ming, this is what really makes her so strong against Kong Ming, is that not only does she do tremendous damage to her, but the silence immunity, it kind of cuts out one of Kong Ming's few alternative roles, because the fact that Kong Ming is generally perceived as a support is a little disingenuous because she's mostly a DPS, so having these little things taken away from her focuses her even more on that role, and Kong Ming is not going to out DPS Wraith, especially if she gets hit. She's probably just going to get one shot and obliterated. So having this silence stops her from getting cut off mid-rotation. If someone else hits your Kong Ming, lowers her health, gets that silence procced, that won't bother Wraith, which is great. So again, another situational PvP mix-in. If your opponent has Kong Ming, Wraith is a great answer. The speed, of course, is awesome. That's why it's so high. The health bonus, 30%, is okay. This is where I kind of wish, though, that I wish they would have traded speed by 60 for something along the lines of, like, even attack 15 or 20%, so that way she would be more pushed into the PvE realm, but that might have been a bit too much. I don't know. I don't have the raw stats on her numbers for how she performs as a 10-star. I know it's very high. I've seen basic numbers, and even if you just calculate the math of how much damage she can do per turn with her ability, you can see it's a lot. But maybe adding something like 15, even 15% attack might just be too much, so they went with sticking with speed to kind of give her the parallels between her and Phoenix. I personally don't like it as much because I wish when they make these kinds of girls that they would commit them specifically, because otherwise you end up with these really weird kind of like, either they're garbage or broken. And in Phoenix's case, it ended up being broken. In Wraith's case, I think it's a little bit less to that effect, but it's still going to be that way, of course, because they want their new girls to sell well. So they end up giving them the best of both worlds, and I don't like that from a developer standpoint, but I get why they do it. I just wish they didn't. Third passive is going to be that her basic attack is changed to attack random backline enemy and reduces their energy by 50, and that is awesome. That's another one like the Amelia crowd control. So this doesn't look like crowd control on paper because it doesn't actually stop them from doing anything, except it delays their ability to do their active spell, which is incredibly important. Now, because it's only one enemy, it's not going to feel amazing, but when it happens to hit someone like a Psychic and stops her from casting her weakness on 4 of your allies, that is a huge boon. And it also prevents your opponents in PvE, the bosses, from one-shotting your team as much, because if they can't use their abilities, they're going to do less damage. Now, bosses do have some sort of weird crowd control immunity. It's not like 100%, but they don't always get afflicted by it. So that's one thing I'd like to know in the comments below. Anyone who has a 10-star Wraith, how often does this proc on bosses? Because I know generally bosses have a reduced chance to be crowd controlled. Some of them it's actually 0, some of them it's not that low. I don't know how the energy steal or energy reduction fits into that equation, so if anyone in the comments below does know that, please let us know, and I'll pin the comments so everyone can see it. But basically, it's just another mix-up between making her good in PvP and good in PvE, which makes her very well balanced. Now, Her kit doesn't come quite together as well as Phoenix's, because Phoenix is very obviously built for PvP. However, Wraith is kind of somewhere in the middle, but her PvE damage is undeniable, and she is probably the best PvE single DPS right now. I don't think that can be disputed. Even in fights where there are 2 bosses, there's no way you're going to beat her damage with that 1500% multiplier. Now, if you end up in boss fights with 3, there might be ways to manipulate the numbers a little bit, but even then, it probably can't happen. I don't see anyone beating the math that he puts out. So, is she a good girl? For sure. She is probably the best PvE. And not only that, but she is also incredibly strong in PvP. So, for an overall picture, you wanted to rank girls like in a tier list, it becomes very difficult to actually analyze her compared to Phoenix as a whole, because if you just say PvP, Phoenix is better. But if you try to mash up the both and say which girl is better throughout the entirety of the game, now it starts to be a little bit harder, and you can make a case for as why Wraith would be just as good or better. And I believe that is an interesting dilemma that it presents to players, because of course most whales are going to be focused on PvP, but at the same time having good PvE girls allows you to do things like the intern job event that's on right now, where you have to fight the 3 different bosses, and the first place person gets a bunch of rewards, including like exclusive orange artifacts, and Wraith is going to be great at getting you those things, and those things give you incredible amounts of power in PvP, so in turn her PvE power does translate to PvP power in an indirect way. So personally, I like Wraith better design-wise, because she's just not straight broken. I don't like they split her kit into 2 different directions like that, but it does feel at least a little bit more fair than Phoenix's does, so I'll give them that. Phoenix is just outrageous in terms of what she can do in PvP, so at least Wraith has that going for her. She makes a bit more sense in terms of scaling, I guess I should say. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I being ridiculous to say that Wraith could even compete with Phoenix on a tier list? Of course, remember that I said that if we're dealing as the game as a whole here, not PvP only, of course. But let me know what you think in the comments, and as always, guys, have a great day.